Hello again. It's quite difficult to follow up on such a beautiful talk by Nancy, but I will try to tell you something about how to organize a telescope collaboration, such as the ngEHT. So what the collaborations focus group within the HPC working group is all about is the relationship between, on the one side, the individual ngEHT member, and the other side, the collaboration as a whole. And we want to try and optimize this relationship. So one way of understanding what we're trying to do is via this one-dimensional spectrum of governance structures, or relatedly social epistemologies. And I'm going to call one extreme the top-down type of collaborations, and the other extreme the bottom-up type of collaborations. So examples might be a paradigmatic top-down example is, for instance, Atlas at the sea. And on the bottom-up end of the spectrum, we see either like scientific communities as a whole, or maybe structures like the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And our ideal would be for the ngEHT to be somewhere in between. So let me illustrate what I mean by these terms. So paradigmatic top-down structures, collaborations are characterized often by having physical headquarters where everyone works together. It's often very focused on one or a few purposes, like detecting the Higgs boson. And often this means that collaboration is prioritized over the individual, and it can be quite difficult for the individual at times to be free. And these collaborations often quite hierarchical. Then the bottom-up collaborations often don't have physical headquarters, and communication is much more indirect, diffuse, conferences, publications, etc. Authors coalesce in and out of collaborative projects, and there's a lot of freedom for the individuals as long as they can obtain funding to pursue whatever research line they think is most fruitful. Now, both types have benefits and drawbacks. So top-down approaches are very good if you really need a lot of people to work together towards one grand effort. And on the other hand, as I said, for individuals, like carving out an individual PhD project, if you're in a Atlas collaboration where most papers are with 3,000 authors, can be quite a challenge. And then on the other hand, the bottom-up approach can be very difficult to achieve grand, big projects and results. But yeah, there's more room for individual freedom. So basically what we aim for with ngEHT is to be in the middle, but in such a way that we are the best of both worlds. So keeping that in mind, we want to optimize the collaboration, the structure of the collaboration, both to optimize the output, the knowledge produced, but also the welfare of the individual. And this means we need to work simultaneously at multiple fronts, and these are very much related and overlapping. We have different subgroups of people focusing on different topics related to optimizing the collaboration. And I've tried to schematically visualize these here. So let me go through them one by one, and eventually I'll focus on authorship towards the end. So starting with communication structure. This feeds into all the other topics. We need to understand how communication works within a collaboration like the ngEHT. In this case, we're using digital tools from the digital humanities. But one challenge here is that the communication within the ngEHT is much less centralized and systematic than, for instance, an Atlas. So that's something we're running up against. Another focus area is conduct, internal climate, and conflict resolution. So we've just written a code of conduct, which every member will have to follow if they want to be and remain a member. And we are going to develop multiple related documents, such as a conflict resolution policy or procedure, and keep monitoring what the collaboration thinks of these so we can continuously update them and make sure that at any one time they're adapted to the specific collaboration, in this case, the ngEHT. Then we also have a forecasting tournament, which is an exciting development. And the idea there is it's kind of a subtle way of eliciting from all the members of the ngEHT what they predict that the ngEHT will find, and also how likely all these predictions are. And this is important because it, for instance, feeds into difficult decisions when designing the telescope array. And also, for us philosophers and historians and social scientists, it helps us understand how hypotheses are generated and develop over time and how they are tested. And also afterwards, if we finally have results, this will allow us to say, well, how novel are these results, right? Without rewriting history and maybe not fully remembering how likely we thought some outcomes were at the start, because these projects can take many, many years. Another important topic is how to deal with consensus and dissent, because it's unlikely that 300 people are going to agree on everything. Currently, one lens we're using to look at this topic is whether terminology and concepts from the literature on liberal democracy apply here. Is collaboration like the ngEHT democratic? Should it be democratic? How democratic? What does it mean to be democratic? Which forms of dissent play a role? Are there good forms, maybe less good forms of dissent? And how do we come up with organizational structures that incentivize and enable the positive forms of dissent and maybe avoid the not so positive forms of dissent? And this very much relates to the topic of governance. This task force is systematically looking at related organizations, collaborations, entities, and looking at the lessons, best practices, things that can be learned in order to design a governance structure for the ngEHT. You can see a first draft in the middle. And one thing that we're trying to emphasize is that there should be a scientific council which is elected, and where everyone, junior members, etc., people from different geographic regions, are all represented and have a say. And then finally, I want to focus on the membership and authorship task force, although I won't say much about membership. Here I'll focus on authorship. So what these 5 people have been doing is to try and develop an authorship practice, right? How do you write a paper with 300 people? An authorship practice that's tailored to the needs and wishes, demands of the ngEHT collaboration. Now, in large and diverse collaborations, such as the EHT or the ngEHT or LIGO or Atlas, various members have very different contributions, right? Like a scientist contributes in a way that's very different from how an engineer contributes. Junior members contribute in other ways than senior members. And not all of these contributions are authorship contributions, or at least not in the traditional sense of how we talk about authorship. And for some engineers, for instance, publications aren't as important as for, say, some scientists. So even though we'll talk about authorship in a second, it's important to always keep on the lookout for additional diverse ways of assigning credit, because credit can mean different things or valued in different ways by the different sub-communities within the collaboration. So one thing could be awards, whether they're internal to the collaboration or external awards. It could also be if someone comes up with a theorem or phenomenon that it's named after them, or especially if junior members have a specific responsibility, that they get a job title that reflects that, and the job title is then also publicized on the website, so they can mention this in their CV and use this when applying for jobs. And that being said, for the foreseeable future, for many of these communities, the main currency will be authorship, publications. Especially first authorship, that seems like it's there to stay for at least a little while longer. And this brings with it various challenges, right? For instance, if you have a list of 3,000 authors listed alphabetically, then while junior members often focus a lot of their work onto a few papers, and if they then still end up being somewhere in the sea of authors, that's not that great. Another thing is how to deal, as I said, with dissensus. Like, it's unlikely that 300 plus people are agree on everything. How do you deal with that internally as well as towards to the public? So basically, what we're currently doing, have been doing for the last year, is with these 5 members of the task force, is based on interviews, and we're currently designing a survey to look at various choice points. Some of these are listed here, decision points, figuring out which choices best work for the ngEHT. Right, so first decision point, first question to ask is, well, besides a list of authors at the top, do we also want to add contributor roles? Say somewhere in the paper, this person contributed in this category, like data analysis or something else. And of course, then we need to come up with categories of contributions that work for the ngEHT. One tricky thing there is, okay, these contributions, how are they reported? Are they self-reported? Can lead to several biases. Should it be determined by the main authors, the primary authors, or PIs? But again, that can lead to a whole different set of biases. So some tricky issues to deal with there. Another option is a tiered system, which I'm personally quite a fan of, where instead of one long list alphabetically ordered, you have a small list alphabetically ordered, and then there's a second tier straight after where you start alphabet again, and a third tier, maybe a fourth tier. And of course, right, so for instance, the first tier could include people who've actually written part of the paper, and maybe telescope operators could be in the third tier or something like that. Of course, you would have to discuss exactly which type of contribution goes into which tier. But as long as the first tier is relatively small, then it's clear that, oh, these are kind of the shared first authors. The third decision point is whether the collaboration as a whole, as a collective agent, the ngEHT, should be included as an author, right? Only the ngEHT, or maybe together with the individual authors, but the ngEHT, could it go first or at the end or somewhere in the middle? A fourth option, a more radical one, developed by one of the members of the task force, Josh, is maybe we should abandon the concept of authorship altogether. He argues that there are many norms associated with authorship and they're not actually consistent. So he said maybe we should forget about authorship and focus on different roles like contributors, spokespersons, guarantors, and writers rather than authors. A fifth option one could consider is, in addition to, so besides the author byline at the top, to also have section authors. This is what the IPCC does. And so for every section, you also have a smaller list of authors for the people who worked on that section. And you can maybe also be a main author on a section. So as you can mention on your CV, like, oh, yes, I'm like somewhere in the long list on the top, but I'm also the main author of section 4. And then two more things. One of them is that these collaborations often have different types of papers. And for each of these types, the decision points that I just mentioned, these 5 and many more, can be different. So it might just differ per type of paper. So that makes things yet a bit more complex. And then finally, an very important and complex, subtle topic is how to deal with dissenting views, right? So typically, like in particle physics, if you disagree with the paper, the only option you have is take your name off it, but that's often not very satisfying and can lead to rifts within the collaboration. So one thing you can think about is maybe dissenting minority views could be published as an appendix or somewhere else in the paper or as a separate paper, or maybe that can be done, but should only be done internally, and in the end there should be one consensus paper. So there are many options there that we're currently discussing and considering and trying to figure out which works best for the ngEHT and which works best for which type of dissenting opinion. But perhaps, as in most cases, perhaps the simplest solution is the best solution, and we should make everyone first author. Problem solved. Well, I'm gonna end there. I'm sorry I'm not here to answer your questions, but perhaps Haisin or one of the other symposium speakers can answer them. And if not, please send me an email, or hopefully I'll be there by tonight and you can ask me any questions in person. Thank you.